Hello there, dear listener. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me on this journey back in time to explore the wild world of medieval pastimes and entertainment. Wherever in the world you happen to be right now, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, or the witching hour, I invite you to make yourself comfortable, let your cares melt away, and allow my words to paint vivid pictures in your mind's eye. As you settle in, I'd love to know where on this big blue marble you're tuning in from, and what time of day it is in your little corner of the globe. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. And if you enjoy calm, quirky storytelling that brings history to life in an immersive way, I humbly invite you to subscribe so you never miss one of our soporific sojourns into the past. But you needn't trouble yourself with any of that right now. The only thing you need to do is relax, breathe deep, and let me gently transport you to a time long ago when life was very different than it is today. A time of castles and kings, peasants and plagues, chivalry and superstition. A time we call the Middle Ages. When most people think of the medieval period, they often conjure up images of hardship and drudgery. And it's true, life was no picnic for the vast majority of people during this era, which roughly spanned from the 5th to the 15th century. It was a feudal society where a small noble class ruled over a large peasant population. For the average serf toiling in the fields, or the apprentice plying his trade, each day was a struggle for survival. But even in the face of war, disease, oppression, and backbreaking labour, the human spirit endures. And medieval folks, just like people in every age, found ways to cope with their lot in life and escape, however briefly, into the realms of joy, revelry, and entertainment. Some of their diversions would seem rather familiar to us, while others range from utterly bizarre to the downright dangerous. So come, let us leave the 21st century behind for a while and discover the wild ways that lords and ladies, knights and knaves, jesters and maidens tried to inject some fun into their hard-scrabble lives. It's a journey that will take us from the majestic tournament grounds to the raucous banquet halls, from the misty forests to the muddy fairgrounds. As we explore these bygone amusements, we'll meet an eccentric cast of characters, some heroic, some villainous, and many just trying to get by in a world very different from our own. We'll witness the chivalrous deeds of the greatest knight who ever lived, learn the secrets of a master chef who set the standard for all French cuisine, and mourn the tragic fate of a minstrel turned martyr. Through it all, we'll gain a deeper understanding of the medieval mindset and marvel at the ingenuity and resilience of people who found light in the darkness, laughter in adversity, and merriment in the midst of misery. So blow out that candle, fluff up that pillow, and let's journey back to a time when fun was hard won, but all the more precious because of it. One of the grandest and most iconic forms of medieval entertainment was the tournament. These elaborate martial competitions were a way for knights to showcase their combat prowess, impress the noble ladies, and climb the social ladder. But beyond that, they were hugely anticipated events that offered a splash of colour, excitement, and pageantry for people of all classes. Tournaments typically took place on large fields outside of towns and lasted for several days. Imagine the scene. Rows of colourful tents and pavilions housing the competing knights and their retinues. Banners and flags bearing coats of arms fluttering in the breeze. Vendors hawking refreshments and souvenirs to the gathered crowds. The air crackling with anticipation and the clamour of people, horses and armour. The stars of the show, of course, were the knights themselves, the medieval equivalent of professional athletes and celebrities. Clad in gleaming armour, adorned with colourful silks, they put on quite the spectacle as they paraded around the arena on their majestic war horses. One knight stood head and shoulders above the rest, both in renown and tournament prowess. His name was William Marshall, and his story is straight out of a storybook. Born the younger son of a minor noble in 1146, Marshall was effectively an extra mouth to feed. So his father did what many nobles did with their surplus sons in those days. He essentially donated young William to the church as an oblate. But the rowdy Marshall was not cut out for the contemplative life. As a youth, he was more interested in brawling than praying. Lucky for him, his talents caught the eye of an influential nobleman who decided to train him as a knight. It proved a most fortuitous decision. Marshall took to the knightly arts like a fish to water. But what truly allowed him to make his mark was his daring do on the tourney circuit. In an era when nobles often had to pay huge ransoms if they were defeated in battle or captured, the money that could be won at tournaments offered an attractive alternative. And William Marshall was very, very good at winning tournaments. Contemporary accounts claim he emerged victorious from an astonishing 500 jousts. That's quite the win record, even if it might be exaggerated. But there's no doubt Marshall was the Michael Jordan of the medieval tourney world, a figure of reverence and renown, a one-man spectacle who drew huge crowds whenever and wherever he competed. His success in the arena translated to success at court. Over his long life, Marshall would serve as a right-hand man to no less than 5 English kings, most notably Richard the Lionheart and his brother John. He remained a paragon of loyalty and wisdom through reigns and rebellions, intrigue and outright war. By the time he died in 1219, he'd risen from humble origins to become one of the most powerful and respected men in the realm, the Earl of Pembroke and Lord Protector of the young King Henry III. But let's get back to those tournaments, because that's where Marshall first made his name. A tournament was a much more raucous and chaotic affair than the sanitized, Renaissance fair jousts we're used to seeing today. In fact, the original tournaments were essentially mock battles, free-for-alls, where large groups of knights clashed in an effort to capture each other for ransom. As you might imagine, these early contests often devolved into very real and dangerous brawls, especially when rivalries and tempers ran hot. The melees could result in severe injuries and even deaths, to the point where the Vatican tried to ban tournaments altogether as needlessly risky to life and limb. Those edicts were largely ignored, of course, but they did spur the nobility to make an effort to impose rules and rein in the bloodshed. By Marshall's time in the late 12th century, tournaments had evolved into somewhat more structured and controlled events, while still retaining an element of risk and unpredictability that kept spectators on the edges of their seats. The individual joust emerged as the main event, with knights going head-to-head in an effort to unseat each other with lance and shield. Even then, serious injuries were common. Marshall himself was said to have been pierced clean through the thigh by a lance during one joust. But for the most skilled and cunning knights, the risks were worth the potential rewards of ransom money, a champion's share of the prize purse, valuable war horses and armor, and the favor of a delighted noble patron. To really get a sense of what these tournaments were like at the height of their cultural dominance, let's zoom in on one especially famous, or perhaps infamous, competition that took place in 1274. The setting was the northern French region of Chalons, and the key players were the brash English Prince Edward